This video demonstrates how to apply a waistband onto a pair of trousers. The example here is a men's pair of trousers with a fly fastening or opening. And here we have just the waistband cut, and it has already been fused. So we have the stiff sort of waistband fused onto it already, pressed on with the iron. And our first step is going to be taking that and sewing it on either end. So you can see it has nicely been snipped already for all of our seams. And so we're going to place it like this, fold it in half that way and stitch along on each end. That's our first step. So we have sewn each end of the waistband. Now it might depend on the style of garment that you're doing. Sometimes there might be an underlay or under wrap, and so you may be stitching and pivoting and coming back around here to create a little underlay that sticks out, for example on the top of a skirt for button and button hole. So in this case there is a fly shield that extends out on this side of the trouser, so you can see we have our notches there for that 4 centimetre allowance there, so that will sew to that, so it doesn't need to be sewn there. So we're going to basically first of all just trim this corner here, and then we're going to start to line it up using our notches. We're going to go all the way around, pin one end and the other, and then pin all of the seams, the centre back and the side seams. So notice with the waistband, I've only just pinned one side of the waistband to the trouser. So one side would be pinned and sewn first, and then the second side here would be sewn often to a lining, if you have a lining, or else it can be turned up and hand stitched to finish. So you just sew one side at a time, so it's pinned and matched, and we're going to sew all the way around the one side, and then we're going to snip in and press it open. So now the waistband has been sewn on, and just in that time-lapse video it might have been hard to see as I was stitching. It's just arranging all of the darts and tucks and seam allowance to be open, and that the darts were going in the correct direction. So as I'm stitching on the top here, my hand underneath is manoeuvring these around and double checking that they are in the correct position. Or if you're stitching with this way up, you can see them a little bit better. So our next step is now to snip in to release tension, and we can also grade and reduce bulk, so we can take off the ends of the seam allowances or any tucks or darts or anything, and then we can do some straight snips to just release a little bit of pressure on the waist. So as this circles around the body, the seam allowance, which when it goes down, might create a bit of tension. So snips are good. And then we will press it. So here our waistband is nearly complete. So we have snipped and pressed this seam open. And I've pressed this seam allowance here, 1.5. And so it would depend on what was happening with your garment, to what you would do next. If you had a lining, you would sew a lining up together if you had a trouser lining, and then pin it along this line and stitch it. And then you would come from in between the trouser fabric and the lining fabric, and you would attach the waistband together. In this case, there is no lining, so we would be folding up all of the seam allowance and placing this down and pinning. And then there would be two options, hand stitching, so going along here and slip stitching all along, or you could do what's called stitching in the ditch. So if you have your trouser seam here, you kind of pull it apart so you could stitch right in along there, and you would catch a little bit of this. That would mean that you'd need to roll this down so that you were definitely sure it was past this stitch line. So when you stitched along there, it would catch just the very end of that. Okay, that's kind of a more standard finish that you see in shop bought clothing. It is a little bit tricky to do, to be sure and catch it. So the hand stitch is a finer finish. It does take longer, but you can't go too wrong on it. So you can look at the video on slip stitching to see how to complete the waistband. And so here are the trousers when they're all pinned and ready to be hand stitched, the trouser waistband. There will be just maybe one last thing you want to do, and these corners will be quite bulky, so you want to take them open and reduce whatever extra bulk you can. So the trousers that hit the waistband or skirt at the same position, there will always be bulk, so we're not looking to get it so that it has no bulk at all, but you can first trim off any bits of seam allowance there, and you can also grade it. So this has lots of layers because there's a fly, so you can maybe trim that layer down. So that it is a bit smaller than and lower than the other layer. And believe it or not, just taking a couple of millimeters off reduces the bulk a lot. What you don't want is all the bulk ending at the same point so that it's a big cliff. So if you can grade it, one ends here and the next ends there and the next ends a little bit further, even just millimeters apart, has a surprisingly helpful effect on the bulk. Okay, so let's see how that feels. It's always going to be somewhat bulky, but it feels a lot better than it did. So on each end, just make that effort to go in and trim down some of the bulk and get it less bulky. So here is the finished waistband, the trouser. So you can see that it has been slip stitched, hand stitched all along and all the way around the inside. And that's what the result looks like. It's hard to see it probably up close in the video, but just small hand stitching going all the way along. And then there is given a final press. And there you have your final waistband.